Joining me around the table, Democratic Congressman Raul Grijalva of Arizona, Democratic strategist Kiki McLean, Al Cardenas, president of the American Conservative Union, and returning Dr. Ben Carson. Thanks all for being here. I have to start out with CPAC. And we discussed that Senator Rand Paul won. What does this tell us about the Republican Party, if anything, that Rand Paul came out on top? Let's
well, the theme of CPAC this year precisely was, new challenges, new generation of conservative leaders. And the two who came out on top were young leaders. Rand Paul got 25%, Marco Rubio got 23%. If you look down the list, it was Paul Ryan, Chris Christie. In other words, the top recognized Dr. Carson got a good chunk of change there. And so we showed that indeed the party is revolving around these new leaders in the conservative movement. We also have a couple of different tents. We've got libertarians, Tea Party activists, establishment conservatives. And so the whole idea of the CPAC is to bring the whole tent together.
Although Senator Paul might object to he's close to an isolationist, which has never been among the three things that Reagan conservatives have stood for. What do you think it says, if anything? Is this just a party in search of itself, or
well, look, as someone who was part of the Democratic Leadership Council in the early '90s on staff,
which was trying to moderate the Democratic Party,
a group of Democrats who were trying to lead the party out of the wilderness at the time, and successfully did so. What you see out of CPAC as an outside observer is it's a chance for people to introduce themselves. I'm not sure that any American walked away from an understanding this weekend that the Republican Party has made a decision about where it's going to go. I think that's still a really big question. I think what you saw were, as Al said, some leaders come in and introduce themselves. It's a little bit of the state pageants before you get into the Miss America show. And I think what you saw were some early introductions. I think it's kind of a no hits, no runs, no errors for the Republican Party. There were moments of disappointment. I think when you saw what Ann Coulter had to say about immigration, that was disappointing because I think both sides think that there's somewhere to move forward. But mostly it was a moment for everybody to say, we have a lot of work to do in this party.
I thought you saw the fusions that the Republican Party is going through politically when you have this whole retribution threat in terms of bipartisanship, that if you work on consensus, we're going to primary you from the Club for Growth. And I think that with the Ryan 2 budget that came out, the same as the first one, I think you see a party trying to define himself, and I think that the CPAC was one part of their definition, and right now the definition that has the upper hand, and I think it doesn't speak well for electoral politics down the road for the Republicans as a whole.
Since you brought up Ann Coulter, I want to play just a quick bite from her. Ann Coulter being a conservative columnist and commentator, and this was part of what she had to say, talking about undocumented workers and a pathway to citizenship or to legal documentation. Here's what she said.
If amnesty goes through, America becomes California, and no Republican will ever win another national election.
Is that a good message for Republicans to have out there at this point?
Well, I don't know that's a good message for anybody because, we have people here. They're an important part of our economy. And all we have to do is look to our north, Canada, where they have a very functional guest worker program. And if we initiated that, allowed people to be here legally, work, be registered, pay taxes, go back home, and continue along the pathway of citizenship if that's what they wanted to do, just like anybody else. Why do we have to make it into a big political issue?
I will tell you this, Candy. Yesterday we had a panel on immigration. The evolution of the conservative movement on the issue of immigration is nothing less than astonishing. Congressman Labrador headed that panel. The panel talked about moving forward and agreeing on an immigration reform package that covered all of the concerns of the conservative movement. And frankly, there was, if not unanimity, a wide consensus that that's the way we're going. And so I think Ann...
And yet she represents a part of the party that is...
She represents an audience, but I think if you would have looked at this thing last year, you would have never had a panel like this or a reaction from the audience like we had. There's been tremendous progress towards a bipartisan, comprehensive immigration reform package, and one that includes the concerns of most conservatives. Concerns that have lasted for 20 years or more since the Reagan 1986 situation. We thought we needed more on the enforcement side. I think Raul and the other members of Congress are working on that. So by the time this thing is over, I think most wants and needs of all sides of the aisles are going to be met.
Go ahead.
You know, Coulter's comments do nothing but try to stir up the same divisions that we saw for the last 3, 4, 5, 6 years. Us versus them. They're not part of us. Those kind of, you know, barely muted commentaries. I think we've gone way beyond the culture sense of what immigration should be. It's a broken system. Most Americans agree to that. And there is an opportunity here for some bipartisanship and to coming up with a solution to this broken system.
It would certainly take it off the, it would still take it off the plate for 2016, which I think you all probably would be happy about, Republicans.
Well, it needs to get done. And
right.
frankly, the window's very narrow. Forget 14 or 16. If it doesn't get done now, this thing may go on the shelf for a long time.
This raises a point and a challenge that the Republican Party has. And that is that they have some big entertainment celebrities, political entertainers on their side of the aisle that I think could prove to be really challenging for the Republican Party.
Speaking of Donald Trump, speaking of...
Donald Trump, you think about radio talk show hosts that we could name a few, who have the potential to derail those Republicans who want to work. They are the first to lay down threats about who they'll support and won't support, and the first to sort of wield that, that bat of anti-cooperation or the bat of obstructionism. And that's a problem for the Republican Party.
I don't think that's going to be as big a problem if people are willing to sit down at the table and discuss things without having hardened positions.
Well,
that always seems to be the case. We just need to soften those positions and let everybody explain the reason that they have their positions and what the rational conclusion is to that position, and let's talk about it. In the multitude of counselors is safety, as it says in Proverbs, and we need to begin to live by it.
Yeah. And I think, Kiki, and I think that both sides of the aisle, frankly, have folks who who cater to activists. That's not unhealthy. It's a point of view, but you know, we're living now in an era of new media and media celebrities that take a very strong position, and I think the Dem side of the aisle has as many of these participants as ours. At the end of the day, it's, you know, both sides of the aisle are coming up with some pretty committed activists.
I want to move you to a problem sort of inside the Democratic Party, and it also brings to the fore the quickly, something that the House Democratic leader Nancy Pelosi said to me last week. We were talking about changes in entitlements in order to kind of bring the budget under control, and here's what she said.
If the point of it is to take trophies, let's raise the age, that doesn't save money. It's a trophy. It's a scalp.
So along with this, we seem to have the former Speaker of the House, the current minority leader, saying, you may not touch entitlements. We have the progressive wing of the Democratic Party saying to the president, no, you may not touch entitlements. And yet, everyone says you cannot bring down spending without touching entitlements. Do you trust the president to protect Medicare, Social Security, Medicaid?
I'm holding the president to his word through the campaign that those were important programs, that other things can be done to create savings, to generate revenue. You know, the Progressive Caucus budget reflects that. And but I think also we have to understand that this is also a philosophical fight as much as it is a fiscal fight. There is the idea of shrinking government, and Medicare and Social Security have always been seen as the political targets of some of my colleagues on the other side of the aisle. So obviously, this is not just about fiscal policy, it's about political philosophy. And you know, when you're at the perch of success, you can talk about reducing spending. But when you're working families or young people trying to get that dream in this country of ours, it doesn't look the same from the perch.
Well, you know, what about, though, the idea that there is a division within the Democratic Party about how to change it? Some people say, well, we can take more out of providers, and I want to get your take on that with Medicare. Right. But what about raising the age of Social Security? What about saying, if you make this much money as a person over 65, really you ought not to get as much Social Security as everybody else? Is that something that the president would look at? Do you get that vibe?
I think to be a good leader on this, you have to recognize that everything's on the table, but it all must be handled responsibly. And I have great faith in President Obama's willingness and desire and commitment to do that. But here's what we do know. We do know, as the congressman pointed out, that there's a political philosophy, and there are people on both ends of the argument who will create the boundaries, if you will, for the debate, to bring that in the middle. That's what the two different budgets that get presented are about. Now, where do we start the conversation? The reality is, resolution to the crisis that we're in right now won't feel good for everybody at the end of the day. But what it does mean is that everybody's got to be willing to be at the table so that we can move forward. Because the worst thing that can happen is nothing.
Well, I wish Kiki was at the White House because I don't share her confidence. Look, many have asked me, well, what happened at the 2012 election? You asked Dr. Carlson earlier. Look, we were selling broccoli to 70% of the American electorate, and they were giving away cheesecake to 100% of the electorate. These entitlement programs require serious thought and require some sacrifice and require providing a safety net, but on an affordable basis. It's not affordable. We're not going to deal with the serious problems of America unless we deal with it more seriously. I think their side has a political problem. I think, as the congressman said, dealing with their promises during the campaign and the mathematical realities of the day.
Let me give you the last word here with 30 seconds, and that is entitlements. Do you think that benefits in entitlements such as Medicare, such as Social Security, need to be cut for some recipients?
Well, we have to recognize that we don't live in isolation. There is history. And when these things were started, you know, what was the average age at which somebody collected Social Security? What was the average age of death? We have to move with the demographics of the society. And if we just live in isolation and don't adjust as things happen, of course we're going to be in trouble.
Right. Which is to say that people are getting older and we ought to extend the age for some of those benefits. I want to thank all of you so much for being here. I appreciate your time. Come back.
Okay.
When we return, Pope Francis delivers his first sermon to the faithful. The headlines are next.